Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Pox Populi and Friends. It is Friday, 8:30 p.m. here on the Iberian Peninsula. Good evening to you, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are listening in the world. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking with someone who I have had on multiple occasions, and I've also chatted with him on his channels as well. An Irishman, a full Irishman, not like a half bred like me, but who also finds himself in España. Um, and we'll be talking about various things on his mind that have caught his attention. And then we will also be taking, of course, your questions and incorporating your comments as well. If you would like to contribute to the Keep Pox Populi Getting to the End of the Month fund, you can send in super chats to Entropy. And also, this is a good way if you have a question or a comment that you really want to have addressed. That's a good way to do it as well, because some of the questions sent over on Odyssey or in the YouTube comments might get lost in the over the course of the conversation. So there's the Entropy link. I'll put it over in Odyssey as well. And yeah, so let's see if TGP is ready. Are you there,
I'm
my
here.
friend?
I'm here. How are you?
All right. I'm doing all right. How have you been?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Getting ready for the summer. Not looking forward to the heat. And that's about it.
Yeah, the last time we spoke was, I think, about 2 months ago. You were part of the panel of guests I had invited on to speak about all the things that are going on, that have been going on in Ireland. Some very positive things, also things that show the magnitude of our struggle. So, what have you been up to for the past 2 months? What's been catching your attention? What have you been up to on your channel?
Well, I got sick. I got sick about, I don't know, 5 weeks ago. And I think it was pneumonia. I didn't go to a doctor. And it took me about 3 weeks to shake that off. So all that time I was still working. I was still going into work. But then I'd get home and I just read. I'd go to bed and I'd read. So I was reading books and mostly fiction. And then in the last few weeks, I started, doing exercise again, getting out and about. And I was reading Jacques Derrida's Technological Society. And I started it last year. And I don't know, I was 100 and something pages into it. And then I forgot about it. And I got back into it. And I recommend people check out this book and also his book on propaganda. You'll see the world and you'll see modernity with a different pair of eyes.
Sorry, could you repeat the name of the author?
Jacques Ellul,
Okay.
Ellul. He was a French philosopher. His books are mostly,
And so,
yeah, in the 50s and 60s. Yeah.
okay. And he wrote a book called The Technological Society. That kind of rings a bell. Kind of sounds a lot like Kaczynski.
Is that Uncle Ted?
Yeah, good old Uncle Ted. And this
Yeah.
is what's been on your mind then. So, because you got on to me wanting to talk about some of the things that have been happening in regards to technology, and some others have addressed me as well. They've asked, why haven't I been making a commentary on digital currencies or AI? Why haven't I really got involved in the debate surrounding AI art and things like that? And to be honest, it's really because I just think it's happening. There's not really much we can do to stop it. And like most other quote unquote technological advancements, it's not really an advancement at all, so much as it is an imposition. These aren't really advances. It's not like going from stone to bronze to steel. I don't know. So you've reading these books. It clearly triggered some thoughts about tech. So why don't you go ahead and tell us kind of the effect that this book has had on you, and why it's sent you down this path of thinking about these things.
Right. So just to say, you're actually on the money, like in regard to technique and technology and all that. As it becomes more advanced, that creative spark, that inventive spark fizzles out. So it looks for efficiency. And, back in the day, centuries ago, you had guys tinkering out in their sheds, and they'd happen upon something marvelous, and it would change things, it would revolutionize things. But what do we get? Well, we seem to just get bigger and bigger TVs and handier and handier smartphones. So, yeah, last week, I had to go to the bank. I had to take out money, which, I think is a very sensible thing to do. Take your money out of the bank when you can. And I was looking for a branch because where I am at the moment, I've only been here for a few months. So I was looking for a branch. And funnily enough, I was using technology to find the closest branch. I knew where there was another one, but it was quite a distance. And I found a branch close to where I live, and I went there. And when I arrived, I was about to go in, and I saw there was a sign on the door, and it said, "We do not dispense cash at this branch. We do not have a safe." And I thought, right, it's a sign of the times. You go to a bank to take out your money, and you can't because the bank doesn't have any money. So I said, right, I'll have to go where the other one is. So I went all the way down to it, and I got in, and I was hoping there wouldn't be a big queue. There was one cashier in the bank, and it was a young fella, about 25. And in the queue, well, there was a woman. He was serving this elderly woman. She was about 60, so she wasn't completely over the hill. He was serving her. And then in front of me, there was a guy who was about, I don't know, maybe he was 45 years old. And I was thinking, right, I won't be waiting long here. There's only one customer in front of me and one at the desk. But the old woman, whatever she was doing and getting done, the last part of the transaction was what stalled her completely. She just had to sign her initials on a personal digital assistant, whatever, PDA thing, with a pen, And she was completely confused about this. And the bank teller, I don't know, his mind was elsewhere. He was sort of staring down, possibly at his phone under the desk or something. And she was still standing there. So the transaction wasn't going through because she didn't know how to sign it with a pen. And about a minute passed, and then he realized, oh, the customer's still here and the transaction hasn't gone through. And he looked up and said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "What do I do?" And he kind of leaned over the desk and he pointed at the digital screen and told her, sign it with this pen, just sign. And she was like, "Where?" And then he just pointed anywhere there. And eventually she signed. And then he sat back down in his chair and he was away with the fairies again. And she was perplexed because whatever, the transaction wasn't complete. And a minute later, then he looked up, he saw she was still there, and he got back up and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong now?" And she was like, "I don't know." And he was like, "Just click confirm here, click confirm." And she tried to do it, but she didn't hit it hard enough or whatever. And then he took the pen out of her hand and did it for her. So all in all, like when I went in, this woman was already there, but it took about 15 minutes for her to finally get her transaction done. And I was thinking, this woman's not 80 years old. She's 60. She would have experienced technology in her life, the last 20 years, the last 25, 30 years, whatever. But it was as if the technology had gone way ahead of her competence. And after that, the 45-year-old man, he went up to the desk, and a similar thing happened again. When it came to signing his name on the digital thing. Now, he took less time, in fairness, than the 60-year-old woman, but he was still a bit confused, and the teller was kind of away with the fairies again. And then he looked and saw that transaction wasn't going through, and he told him what to do, and then said, yeah, hit confirm, whatever. So I was just thinking, it just seems that people, with the rise of technology, people are becoming a little bit dumber, and they're not able to cope with the technology, even if the technology seems to younger people to be relatively simple. They seem to be having problems with it, and they kind of feel left out in the cold. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, and it seems like we're having some technological difficulties over on Odyssey. So I apologize about that. Odyssey has been acting this way the past 2 streams. Actually, it has been buffering. It has been blacking out. Apparently, it's not synchronized as well from the StreamYard broadcast, which is unfortunate because Odyssey is a good platform. But I'm not sure what I can do to fix this. So I would just say, in response to your story there, that yeah, it's old Varg, the crazy man. Some people either love him or hate him, I suppose. Although I'm actually quite indifferent about old Varg, but he has compared technology to a wheelchair, and it's great if you need a wheelchair to be able to have a wheelchair, and the invention of a wheelchair is very useful and essential if you really need it. But if you have functioning legs, you don't need a wheelchair. If you do use a wheelchair, then or a motorized wheelchair, then you're using that for convenience. It's a technological advancement, quote unquote, but really it's not advancing you. It's just making your life convenient. Okay, you don't have to move your legs. You don't have to exert as much energy. You can sit down and basically drive everywhere if you're using one of those motorized wheelchairs in particular. And so what happens to your legs? Well, they atrophy, and the same thing happens with technology for the brain. And we can see this all the time with people who now no longer know how to read a map. People's attention spans are going down, all sorts of various effects. And in the case of like that 65-year-old woman not being able to use that digital technology, it might not be so much that she's not clever enough to use it, or she's too old to grasp it. That might be, that second part certainly might be, but it's also because we haven't had time to develop along with this technology. It's being imposed on us very rapidly. And so what do you think about this? This is something that, again, Kaczynski wrote about in his famous screeds against technology, but he really talked about the imposition of technology that advances too quickly for us to keep up with in the first place. And then it's also not even something that we want to use. It's more like we have to use it, otherwise we get left behind.
Yeah, like for example, I couldn't use my bank account now without a phone. If I want to do anything, if I want to buy something online, which I rarely do, but if I do want to buy something, many times the transaction won't go through until I confirm that I've received a code on my mobile phone, so on a separate device. And this happens a lot. And even logging in, if you log in to your bank account on your laptop, sometimes the system won't let you log in until you tell them the code that they've sent to your mobile phone. So it seems it's becoming more arduous to do very simple things. And you mentioned about these kind of motorized carts and wheelchairs. I'm starting to see them a lot. not even, okay, in many cases, they're very, very old people, possibly people who have had several strokes. They just about have the use of their right hand or left hand, which is enough to, push the little nozzle forward or backwards so they can move about. And last summer in Madrid, I was, I saw a lot of them going around, these motorized carts. And in some cases, they would be very young people, but they would be morbidly obese. Now, I mean, I'm talking about 150, 160 kilograms. And I often wondered, are they actually, are they able to walk? But the doctor has advised them that if they try to walk, they could have a heart attack because, they've just piled on the pounds. But there was a case last summer where I was in a cafe, and it was the weirdest thing. A guy came in, an elderly man. He came in a motorized wheelchair or electric wheelchair, whatever, and he was able to. His speech was almost gone. It just sounds, kind of animalistic sounds. But the waitress obviously knew him, and she said, "Okay, yes, a black coffee coming up." And he then reversed to a table, and he moved lots of chairs out of his way with his electric wheelchair, and he was close to the door, and you'd just about be able to get past him to exit the cafe. And when my time was up and I was leaving, I went to leave, and it was like a Mr. Bean moment. I squeezed past this guy. I got to the door, only to be blocked by another old man in an electric wheelchair who wanted to enter the cafe. And he was having problems with his device. He couldn't seem to reverse it. And I was kind of trapped between these two elderly men, semi-vegetables, on a very hot day in Madrid, 44 degrees Celsius. So I was just thinking when I saw it, this is technology at play. In bygone eras, these two men would be in bed. Their children and grandchildren will be looking after them. But because of technology, they still have a degree of independence in that they can, I'm guessing they live in an apartment, it has a lift, so they can, drive the wheelchair to the lift, descend a number of floors, go out onto the street, and press the little nozzle and go all the way to the cafe, grunt something at the waitress and get their coffee. And when I finally got out of the cafe, I was thinking, I don't think I'd like to live that long. I wouldn't like to be in that situation. I don't know. I would prefer to go out, when I still had the power of my legs, and go out, under my own terms or whatever, and not be living this sort of life. But technology has enabled these people to still have some sort of life. Not a life I would like, but life nonetheless.
Yeah, it's this dependency on the technology. That's another thing too that Kaczynski writes about, is that advances in technology are usually like I mentioned before, progressing from stone to bronze to steel. You've got these happy accidents or these brilliant minds experimenting and trying to find something better. Well, now it seems like a lot of technological advancements are just designed to help us cope or make things more convenient or more comfortable. But they're not really making us Ubermensch at all. In fact, they're making us Untermensch. And yeah, this thing that we have a lot of people who, frankly, would not be around because they didn't take care of themselves very much, and they lead very unhealthy lifestyles. and they wouldn't be around were it not for these mammoth technological leaps that have enabled them to hang around a bit longer, but in very grim conditions. Now, you said you had some quotes from this book, the Technological Society, that you wanted to share. So I'll throw it back to you. I'm interested to hear some of the passages from this book.
Okay, I'll go through a few of them. I won't go through all of them because I highlighted a lot of text from this book, and I don't want this stream to be longer than your stream with Millennial Woes. So
I don't know if that's possible. We have to go for like 6 hours.
the Red Bull was consumed that evening, I'm sure. So right, yeah, this is one anyway. I just before coming on, I went over. So really, these quotes are just from the first half of the book, quotes that I highlighted last year and forgot about. So the first one is about the modern slums. You know, the modern slums. And remember, this was written in and around the middle of the 1950s. So here goes. Another relationship exists between technique and the machine, and this relationship penetrates to the very core of the problem of our civilization. It is said, and everyone agrees, that the machine has created an inhuman atmosphere. The machine, so characteristic of the 19th century, made an abrupt entrance into a society which, from the political, institutional, and human points of view, was not made to receive it, and man has had to put up with it as best he can. Men now live in conditions that are less than human. Consider the concentration of our great cities, the slums, the lack of space, of air, of time, the gloomy streets, and the sallow lights that continue night and day. Think of our dehumanized factories, our unsatisfied senses, our working women, our estrangement from nature. Life in such an environment has no meaning. Consider our public transportation, in which man is less important than a parcel. Our hospitals, in which he is only a number. Yet we call this progress. And the noise, that monster boring into us at every hour of the night without respite.
It's I can see this becoming, the inspiration for Uncle Ted. There's so much just in that one passage that Kaczynski talks about in the industrial society. And what do you think then is the correct way to respond to all this, to live in this? There's nothing really we can do about it. There's a line from George Orwell in The Road to Wigan Pier where, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but he talks about how it's all well and good to object to and criticize the industrial society and the standardization and industrialization of all of that, and for these reasons reject socialism, basically, because that was the zeitgeist of Orwell's era. Socialism, people that have a knee-jerk reaction to that word tend to forget why socialism arose in the 20th century and towards the end of the 19th century, you could say. Well, it's because precisely of these things. In that era, it was industrialization. In our era, it's this incessant high-tech progress, quote unquote progress. But that was the situation, was that you had all these people who had once lived in rural situations, rural settings, agrarian settings. Well, they were all now being more or less forced to move into these very grim cities. We all know, the history of the Industrial Revolution and what the toll that it exerted on the population. And from the culture of exploitation and the dire living conditions, and just in many ways the utter destitution of people who had gone to live in these cities and work these jobs, well, that becomes the necessary catalyst for people to start thinking, well, maybe we workers deserve a bit more protection. Maybe we should form unions. Maybe we need to have a reaction to this exploitation and this mechanization and standardization of our existence. And Orwell basically says that if you're going to say, well, no, I don't want any part of socialism, that's all well and good, but you have to remember it's a luxury. You can say, I reject the industrial society, I reject the mechanized, standardized society, but you're still in it. And only a fool thinks that he can go off and retreat to his, cottage in the countryside and escape it all. So what do you think, TGP? What are we supposed to do in this situation that is pretty inescapable, really? These things are happening. These developments are happening, and they are being imposed on us.
Yeah. I know, like in England, many years ago, it was very common, and you'd read about it in books, how children from London, I think this was, I don't know, was it some charity organization or was it a government plan, but a lot of children from the slums of London would go on holidays. So they would be brought out to the countryside, maybe places like Kent and Cornwall. And the idea was that they would get to breathe the fresh air and enjoy nature. And there was a similar thing with our uncle in Germany many years ago. He also liked the idea of the youth getting out of the cities, and the kind of the Boy Scouts and going out and learning how to do things and experiencing nature. So it's always been considered a cornerstone of the European psyche that we get to spend time in nature. And obviously that's more difficult now. In my case, if I don't get to go out to the countryside, I will try to go to a park in a city park. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, and you can gain some solace from it, being around trees or even shrubs. And that's another thing, they will try at some stage to, well, this is my impression anyway, they will try at some stage to get rid of the park, the trees. And a few weeks ago, actually, I heard, I'm sure you heard about it, a lot of people were up in arms about it, and it sounded ludicrous, but they wanted to try and get people to go and look at tanks of algae or something like that.
Yes, I saw this.
Yeah, so it's kind of
Yep.
like the system is trying to wean the person
Just to
off.
elaborate, they wanted to show that the trees of the future would be these. I don't even know how they describe them as like LED trees or something like that, because they were also lit up, but they were basically the light coming or emerging from these quote unquote trees was just some algae in a tank. And they called them like the trees of the future, and it's so dystopian. We're truly living in an age that literally cannot see the forest for the trees. Everything gets to be deconstructed. Everything has to be picked apart, but then they don't know how to put it back together once they've taken apart all the pieces. And this is very dystopian because they've already done that with ethnicity, particularly our European ethnicities. They've done it with biological sex, and now they're going to do it, like you said, and I agree, they're going to do it with nature. They're going to pick it apart. They're going to try and represent it artificially or synthetically. We see them doing this with meat. And when they're also, I think a lot of media is predictive programming, or it is getting ideas into into the ether, into the recesses of our brain. And when you see, I can't remember exactly from which media outlet it was, but I think it was Psychology Today or something like that, and it said life doesn't really need to be fulfilling for people to feel happy. Um, we've all know the infamous line, "You will own nothing and be happy." Um, and so when they are telling us that basically you're going to have a life where you own nothing, your life is unfulfilling, but don't worry, you'll be happy. Well, happiness, I think, for someone to be happy all the time, you either have to be a fool or drunk. Uh, happiness is a fleeting, temporary emotion, and it's frankly overrated. Um, and it seems to me that that the idea is to use all of these technological conveniences, not advances, simply conveniences, to maintain this illusion of happiness. But we won't even know that we are in fact desperately unhappy, unfulfilled, and we won't even have the wherewithal to realize, oh, maybe it's a lack of a connection to nature. Maybe I need to go out and be in nature. We won't even have the wherewithal to realize that. And the few of us who might won't even have the ability to then go out in nature because all the trees will have been replaced with tanks of algae. It's truly dystopian.
Yeah, they'll somehow train the human being to become an admirer of Soviet-style apartment blocks, So, yeah, there is a part in the book as well where he talks about the atomization of the individual and the power of the state. So I might just read that. I have about, I don't know, 3 more quotes, but I'll go ahead with it
Yeah, go
anyway.
on. I'm interested to hear some more. Go on.
Okay. These obstacles disappeared at the time of the French Revolution in 1789. With the disappearance of religious and social taboos came the creation of new religions, the affirmation of philosophic materialism, the suppression of the various hierarchies, regicide, and the struggle against the clergy. These factors acted powerfully upon the popular consciousness and contributed to the collapse of the belief in these taboos. At the same time, and this is the second factor which made for the plasticity of the social milieu, a systematic campaign was waged against all natural groups under the guise of a defense of the rights of the individual. For example, the guilds, the communes, and federalism were attacked, this last by the Girondists. There were movements against the religious orders and against the privileges of Parliament, the universities, and the hospitallers. There was to be no liberty of groups, only that of the individual. There was, likewise, a struggle to undermine the family. Revolutionary legislation promoted its disintegration. It had already been shaken by the philosophy and the fervours of the 18th century. Revolutionary laws governing divorce, inheritance, and paternal authority were disastrous for the family unit, to the benefit of the individual, and these effects were permanent in spite of temporary setbacks. Society was already atomized and would be atomized more and more. The individual remained the sole sociological unit, but far from assuring him freedom, this fact provoked the worst kind of slavery.
Technological slavery. Yep. Hmm. So I see some people commenting that detachment from the system is the way forward, is the solution. Slowly detaching yourself from this system. Now, that sounds all well and good, but this is also something that Kaczynski, and I wonder if Ilul, the writer of the Technological Society that you're quoting there, I wonder if he addresses this as well. The problem with the technological post-industrial society is that it's very difficult to detach from it. It's all interdependent. Kaczynski gives the example of a refrigerator today in comparison to an icebox. Now, if your icebox malfunctions or it's not working properly, it's a pretty easy fix, and you can do it yourself. Whereas if you now live in the age of the refrigerator and something starts to malfunction, there are so many little interdependent parts that go into making a refrigerator that render it almost impossible for you to fix on your own. And if any one of those parts suffers a break in supply lines, or there's not enough raw material to make those parts anymore, you will not have the finished product of the refrigerator. The whole product itself depends on a multitude of smaller parts that all depend on these elaborate systems functioning at 100%. And so people can say, well, detach from the system, go live in the countryside or things like that. But then you're dependent on petrol for your car. You're dependent on the roadways to be maintained in order to now live in this more rural area where you won't have things as close as if you were to stay in the village or the town or the city. It's very difficult to actually go completely off grid. And then there's the question of, well, if everyone starts doing that, it becomes the new grid. So basically, it's not just detachment. It's making yourself parallel to society. You have to have your own parallel system of supply lines and resources. And in your personal life, before you accomplish that great objective, you still have to deal with the continual imposition of these new technologies in your bank, in the supermarket, in your children's school. I look around and I see how children are growing up, and there are parents who do a pretty awful job because they just give their children a screen to look at. But then I was thinking, trying to give some of these parents the benefit of the doubt. And I was just thinking about how much more difficult it is to avoid your children being, on these screens. Because even at school, now they're trying to phase out textbooks and replace them all with tablets, and every child is now, even in the lessons, the curriculum is incorporating audio-visual material. So children being able to just, sit down and calmly turn the pages of a physical book and think and look at illustrations and read text. Well, now it's all being replaced with, let's use tablets and let's have, a video segment instead of, teacher reading aloud from a book. I just find this tech stuff truly, the magnitude of it is enormous, and I find it quite blackpilling. Actually, I don't think there's that many ways to escape this. I don't know. Maybe you have a more positive outlook on it.
I don't, unfortunately. But I will say, for example, there are little things we can do. For example, I don't use the self. I've never used the self. Well, no, I used it maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago when it came in, the self-checkout, because I was directed there once. I was told by the by the cashier, who was not a cashier that day. Her job was to direct the customers to this technology, which was absolutely useless. And you go to scan your item and it wouldn't scan it properly, or it would say there was something in the on the scales, something was on the scales, even though there was nothing on the scales, this type of thing. But the idea was, that she would say, no, don't queue up like a mug, at the regular till. Go to the self, you'll be in and out like a jiffy, But the thing
Was
was,
this in Spain or in Ireland?
No, this was in Ireland, and what happened was, she was sending a lot of people then to the self checkout, and that meant the queue was as long as the regular one. And I just, after that, I said, right, I'm never using this. I'm never going to use this because, I've been working all day. I don't want to have to start scanning my own groceries. I don't want to be working. I've just come off a shift. I don't want to do a half an hour. Well, it wouldn't be half an hour, but I don't want to do a shift in the supermarket now or whatever. I don't want to work for free for the supermarket. Um, Plus, I was thinking, if every time I use this self checkout, that means there's going to be more unemployment. That woman her job will be gone because she's trying to get people used to the new technology. But when people get used to the new technology, she's out the door,
Exactly.
as are several of her colleagues on the regular cash register. So that was an example, and I never ever since then. And even today, I might go into a supermarket and they'll try and direct me and say, hey, the self-checkout's free. And I say, no, thanks.
Yeah.
And they say, are you sure? I'm sure. And they say, you could be waiting 20 minutes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm willing to wait. So there are things like that. Plus, I recommend people use cash, the debit card, the credit card. I know it's convenience. It boils down to convenience. People now, they don't want to, pull a fistful of cash and a few notes out of their pocket and, tot things up. And they don't want to do that. They just want to take out their card or their phone and swipe it and not look back, So,
and this is what's concerning. And I see a nice quote here, a nice comment from Iberian writer who said these things are like awful solutions for non-existent problems. And that, I think, encapsulates very well a lot of these so-called technological advances of the past decade or decades. They really are just, pretty awful solutions for problems that aren't really problems. It's just like how bureaucrats need to make bureaucracy. They need to have a purpose. They need to do something. So they just make up more pointless laws and restrictions and regulations. They have to have something to do. And it's the same with technology. They just need to make these developments, these advancements that don't really solve any problems because there wasn't a problem there to begin with. And it is concerning that people, I think, will welcome the central bank digital currencies with open arms because a lot of us already are making transactions, just clicking on a website. I think the lockdowns conditioned a lot of people to do this because, for nearly 70 days, in some cases, the only way to make a purchase of something was to do it on Amazon or some other equivalent online shop and get your stuff delivered to you. In response to the lockdowns, a lot of supermarkets and even the restaurants that were able to do it, the butchers, the florists, all the businesses that were able to do it, started creating online purchasing functions and then delivering their products to the address of the buyer. It's curious, in the town where I live in Spain, it's still so far behind. I guess that's a good thing in some ways, that we don't have any supermarkets with automatic, self-checkout registers. But there are some things I suspect will come to this small town. And then there's the question too of I remember when supermarkets used to have a bagger. There was the cashier, and then there was also usually some adolescent who would bag your purchases, your items for you. Now, these are pointless jobs, talking about, problems that are non-existent, pointless inventions, pointless conveniences. A lot of jobs are pointless as well. And I suspect that that's going to be or it already is, the argument that the lab coats and their acolytes make. Well, who cares about the jobs of cashiers? It's such a useless, useless eater job. And so let's replace them all. But then when you get to things like lorry drivers, truck drivers, and automated trucks, automated cars, self-driving cars, in a country like the United States, driving a truck, driving a lorry, right? For those of you who might think of truck and you think of like a four wheeler. I'm talking the lorries for transporting goods and services. That vocation is one of the top, if not the top vocation for like working class, so to speak, sort of mid-level education young men in general, regardless of age, actually. When I was in my college years, my university years, at the local community college, one of the number one courses on offer there wasn't anything about education, getting your degree in business management or economics or anything like that. No, one of the number one courses there was training to be a lorry driver, a truck driver. And I think then that when we're looking at things like automated technology, things like AI, and the imposition of all these things, the imposition of central bank digital currencies, really, I think we need to, this is again something that's quite frustrating, we need to step over the normie conservatives who start trembling at the idea of state intervention. Everyone can think about this in their own personal lives. I will just go off to live off grid somewhere in nature, or I will refuse to use these things. I will hold out as long as possible. Well, as always, that will just end up in the long defeat that conservatives, nationalists have been suffering since the Second World War, at least. Really, what's necessary is for nationalists and conservatives, and whatever other term you want to use, people like us, to have power and to wield it. And the state has to intervene and say, no, you aren't going to impose automated technology on all sorts of different sectors and reduce a hell of a lot of people to unemployed dole collectors with nothing more to do but sit on their sofas and collect their UBI. You're not going to, this happened actually recently, I think it was in the state of South or North Dakota. They actually tried, the tech industry, the banking industry tried to pull a fast one over the governor there. And on like the last page of this 180 or 280 page document, on the final pages of that, under the guise of just updating some regulations and things like that regarding banking and trade, well, through that, under that guise, they had inserted the first steps of introducing a central bank digital currency in this state. And the governor read the entire bill and got to those last pages and understood what was being pushed there, what understood the consequences of this language, of these changes, and realized, oh, this is central bank digital currency. Well, I don't want this. And she vetoed it. That is where our solution lies. State power intervening and saying, no, we don't want a digital currency being devised by the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank or I think the Spanish Central Bank is doing this as well. They have something called what was the name of it? Monero or no, that's a cryptocurrency. But the Spanish Central Bank is experimenting with this. It's happening all over. It's inevitable. But the only way around it then is going to be people with legislative power, the government, your state, your local provincial government, regional government, or national government entirely saying no. But that's going to make a lot of conservatives, a lot of Ben Shapiro fans, a lot of libertarian types all up in arms. Well, then what is your proposal? What is your solution to it? Just go live in the woods? If only we could all do that, sure, that'd be great. But not everybody wants to do that, actually, and not everybody is capable of doing that. Any thoughts on state power as the tool of our salvation here?
Of course, the state could intervene, and you would hope that it would. Unfortunately, we've seen the state, the global state, in hoc with Big Pharma in the last number of years. Everything they did increased profits for massive corporations. We've mentioned it before. It was a time when they closed down the gyms, but there would be a McDonald's beside it, open for business. Amazon made massive profits during the 3 years. I'll be careful because I know you're on YouTube. So yeah, it's it would be nice, and you would hope that the state now and then would back up the ordinary person. I was going to say as well, because you mentioned about jobs and you were on about truck drivers and how jobs can become redundant. Like I've done office jobs, and often throughout my day, I often reflected and said, "What am I doing? This could be done by computers. I'm going to this machine, I'm getting this, and then I'm going to." And I was thinking, I just couldn't see the point of it. What is the point of it? And it kind of hit me that, the system, it needs people to do pointless jobs because it hasn't really planned out a social credit system yet. It hasn't done it yet. So you need people doing Mickey Mouse jobs, jobs that really have no purpose, just to keep the individual busy and stop him from having time to rebel. And there is a part in Brave New World by Huxley, and they're really at the cutting edge of technology, and you've got a caste system and all the rest. But I can't remember, is it the controller or something, or the comptroller? He's talking to one of the main characters, and he's explaining parts of the system, and the guy asks him, why don't you just let people be free and not have to work? Because they don't really have to work. We have all the material wealth we need. We have all the food we need and all the rest of it. And the chief says that, yeah, this was the original idea, but it doesn't work that way, because the ordinary people, they need to be kept busy. If they have any sort of time to think, they start going crazy. And he mentions Ireland, and he says that they, as a sort of trial, they reduced the working week, I don't know, from 5 days to 3 days a week, and it led to massive societal problems. So they had to reinstate the 5-day week. There was almost a complete an outright rebellion in Ireland. So they had to make the worker do the 5-day week. So these are things on a positive as well. Like, there are jobs that they disappear, but then they come back during an economic crisis. So, for example, the cobbler, during good times, everyone buys cheap tack, from whatever, Bangladesh and China. If you have a hole in your shoe, you just buy another pair of shoes. But then when you have an economic crisis, suddenly you see a cobbler shop opening up on the street. The cobbler's back in business. So there are jobs that do come back now and then.
Yeah, definitely, that's true. And if you make yourself useful, and if you have made yourself useful in a community, I think that's the main thing. On the grand scale, I think we do need state intervention. Of course, everyone is aware that right now there couldn't be states less interested in the well-being of their people than at any other time in history. I truly would like to see some analysis of this. If there has ever been a time in history where all across the world, really, all across Europe, then in North America, Australia, if there's ever been a time where simultaneously all of these governments, whether it's a monarchy or democracy, republic, whatever, just were in the hands, all the power was concentrated in the hands of people who were so dreadful and hateful and antagonistic towards their own people. There's of course obviously the cases of the random monarch, who was despicable towards his own subjects, the tyrant, the despot. Um, but usually, the monarch, the dictator even had some interest in the well-being of his subjects, of his people, um, even if he considered himself apart from them, of an entirely different caste, bloodline even. But right now it just seems like total mask-off malevolence all around the world. So of course we can't rely on the state to intervene on our behalf when it comes to replacing loads of truck drivers with self-driving trucks, or cashiers with automated checkouts, or our entire mode of being able to pay with money we own privately, cash, being replaced with these traceable tokens, basically digital tokens. But yeah, on the personal level, I do agree that there are certainly things you can do. It's just a matter of how long. And then, of course, I do think that people who are working to create parallel systems, that is something very worthwhile. And who knows, maybe more people will start doing that all around Europe, and it will catch on, and there'll be more of those communities popping up here and there. Another thing then that you wanted to talk about today, well, unless there's anything else that you want to say regarding tech and the things that are to come.
Yeah, I have a few more. I'll just read 3 more quotes, and then we can finish that. I was going to say, yeah, there is an attack on the rural way of living, and you see every now and then the government is considering legislation, to introduce legislation whereby you would need a license to have a few chickens in your garden, this type of thing. This is obviously to stop people from leaving the system, or from having some degree, albeit a very small percentage, of independence from the system. They don't want you to have any independence from the system. They don't want you having your own power supply. They don't want you having your own food. They want everyone. It's like the Borg. They want everyone to be a uniform dependence on the system. But yeah, I'll read out. This is a quote. I titled it "Attack on the Natural World," so I'll just go into it here. The second obvious characteristic of the technical phenomenon is artificiality. Technique is opposed to nature. Art, artifice, artificial. Technique as art is the creation of an artificial system. This is not a matter of opinion. The means man has at his disposal as a function of technique are artificial means. For this reason, the comparison proposed by Emmanuel Mounier between the machine and the human body is valueless. The world that is being created by the accumulation of technical means is an artificial world, and hence radically different from the natural world. It destroys, eliminates, or subordinates the natural world, and does not allow this world to restore itself or even to enter into a symbiotic relation with it. The two worlds obey different imperatives, different directives, and different laws, which have nothing in common. Just as hydroelectric installations take waterfalls and lead them into conduits, so the technical milieu absorbs the natural. We are rapidly approaching the time when there will be no longer any natural environment at all. When we succeed in producing artificial aurora borealis, it's in the plural, I'm not used to this one in the plural. Aurora borealis, night will disappear and perpetual day will reign over the planet. So that's the attack on nature. And I'll go quickly to, we've already spoken about it, the attack on the solitary individual. So this will just take me a second to find. Okay, right. The enormous effort required to put this technical civilization into motion supposes that all individual effort is directed toward this goal alone, and that all social forces are mobilized to attain the mathematically perfect structure of the edifice. Thematically does not mean rigidly. The perfect technique is the most adaptable and consequently the most plastic one. True technique will know how to maintain the illusion of liberty, choice, and individuality. But these will have been carefully calculated so that they will be integrated into the mathematical reality merely as appearances. Henceforth, it will be wrong for a man to escape this universal effort. It will be inadmissible for any part of the individual not to be integrated in the drive toward technicization. It will be inadmissible that any man even aspire to escape this necessity of the whole society. The individual will no longer be able, materially or spiritually, to disengage himself from society. Materially, he will not be able to release himself because the technical means are so numerous that they invade his whole life and make it impossible for him to escape the collective phenomena. There is no longer an uninhabited place or any other geographical locale for the would-be solitary. It is no longer possible to refuse entrance into a community, to a highway, a high-tension line, or a dam. It is vain to aspire to live alone when one is obliged to participate in all collective phenomena and to use all the collective's tools, without which it is impossible to earn a bare subsistence. Nothing is gratis any longer in our society, and to live on charity is less and less possible. Social advantages are for the workers alone, not for useless mouths. The solitary is a useless mouth and will have no ration card up to the day he is transported to a penal colony. An attempt was made to institute this procedure during the French Revolution with deportations to Cayenne. Spiritually, it will be impossible for the individual to disassociate himself from society. This is due not to the existence of spiritual techniques which have increasing force in our society, but rather to our situation. We are constrained to be engaged, as the existentialists say, with technique. Positively or negatively, our spiritual attitude is constantly urged, if not determined, by this situation. Only bestiality, because it is unconscious, would seem to escape this situation, and it is itself only a product of the machine. Every conscious being today is walking the narrow ridge of a decision with regard to technique. He who maintains that he can escape it is either a hypocrite or unconscious. The autonomy of technique forbids the man of today to choose his destiny. Doubtless, some will ask if it has not always been the case that social conditions, environment, manorial oppression, and the family conditioned man's fate. The answer is, of course, yes, but there is no common denominator between the suppression of ration cards in an authoritarian state and the family pressure of 2 centuries ago. In the past, when an individual entered into conflict with society, he led a harsh and miserable life that required a vigor which either hardened or broke him. Today, the concentration camp and death await him. Technique cannot tolerate aberrant activities. Because of the autonomy of technique, modern man cannot choose his means any more than his ends. In spite of variability and flexibility according to place and circumstance, which are characteristic of technique, there is still only a single employable technique in the given place and time in which an individual is situated. We have already examined the reasons for this. All right.
Yeah, so much to say about those lines. I do have the impression sometimes that the powers that be, that should not be, are taking bits and pieces from all of the most dystopian works of philosophy and fiction regarding the future and putting them into reality. And towards the end there, when you were talking about how, because of the technological society, he says that man cannot choose his means any more than he can choose his ends. again, I was reminded by Kaczynski talking about in his work, um, how, for example, the automobile, people say that the automobile delivered us such freedom. But really, Kaczynski says, no. The automobile, what comes with the automobile? Well, speed limits and paved roads that you need to use your automobile. You can't take your automobile off-road unless you have an off-road vehicle designed for that purpose. And even then, you can't just go where you want to go in your automobile. You can't just go, plowing through the woods in your automobile. And then on the motorways, you have to adhere to speed limits, and you have to go where the traffic signals direct you. Whereas, in the past, if you're on horseback, or you're just walking, rambling, you could go wherever you want and take whatever route you wanted to. Of course, you might be rolling the dice in the time of bandits and things like that, but you get the point. So yeah, a lot to reflect on there. And I would just say too, I've shilled this little piece of mine many times, but every time the topic of tech and the future and these dystopian technological societies come up, I just am tempted to shill it. And I think it's a very good piece of writing, if I do say so myself. So I'll put this on the YouTube chat, because Odyssey, I think, has just pretty much given up today, unfortunately. I do see that 7 are watching on Odyssey. I don't know what they're watching, though, because I don't think the Odyssey stream is up to date. It's just continually buffering. But anyway, I'll share it on screen as well. It's something I wrote, one of the first, I think it's the first thing I wrote on my Substack, and it's called The Man of Extinction. And it's just my thoughts on the effects of all this technology and where it's leading us, and what are the consequences that will have on the way we live and the way man thinks, the way man even actualizes, and what does he think he needs? How does he attempt to meet those needs? I think we are being molded by people, not by forces, not by some outside force or deity or anything like that. We're being molded by people who have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea the consequences about what they're doing. Or if they do know, they simply don't care. They just want to see this experiment through. Whether it's the browning of all of our nations, turning us all into this, gray-brown goop everywhere in the world, whether it's putting children on hormone blockers and cutting off genitalia that can never be brought back, whether it's the experimentation with these climate change policies. I just saw Germany ended its nuclear energy program, or it shut down one of its nuclear power plants, and the very next day, Germans were shocked to discover that their energy bills went up 45%. It's like that no one is thinking about the consequences of these actions, and if they do think about them, they don't care. Now, that said, there is a question over on Odyssey that I want to get to, and then we'll dive into some of the other things that you wanted to chat about, German Pointer. It's a question that Black Pigeon Pilled left over on Odyssey. It's a question for both of us. He asked, who does Pox and German Pointer rate as best or favorite philosopher that they have come across? Johann Georg Hamann? If not, I suggest you check him out, given his valuable contributions to what is now known as postmodernism. I'm familiar with that name, so I will give him a look. I've always liked the classical philosophers. I like the Stoics. I've said before that in various moments of my life, the philosophy of the Stoics was more useful and uplifting and gave me guidance and wisdom than anything I've ever found in a religion or a faith. So I think the Stoics for me would occupy a very high and important place. Alain de Benoit, I don't know if he would be considered a philosopher, but he has some very interesting things as well that he's written. Interesting thoughts. Dominic Vener is another one. I'll say I'll leave it there. The list might get too long, but how about you, German Pointer?
Yeah, I also like the Stoics. I haven't read lots of Stoics, but I do like the Stoics, and particularly Seneca. I think he has a book about getting old, and I read that a few years ago. And it's amazing, to think that this guy wrote it thousands of years ago, and life hasn't, existence itself hasn't changed. Obviously, we're talking about modernity, and we're talking about this technological society, but human needs haven't really changed. We still have these existential crises from time to time. And another philosopher I'm a fan of is Arthur Schopenhauer, and I read a few of his books. But one, they say that he's the pessimistic philosopher. I don't think so. I think he's a realist, and he even wrote a book called. I read it in Spanish many years ago. It was called El Arte de Ser Feliz, so the art of being happy. And I thought it was a great book, and I think it was in aphorisms as well. So, people talk a lot about Nietzsche. Like Nietzsche, what got him going was coming across Arthur Schopenhauer when he was a young man. So, yeah, they would be my favorites.
Yeah, I've actually I've never really read profoundly, seriously the works of Nietzsche, but he's one of those philosophers that you just can't escape. His influence is everywhere. And of late, I've been enjoying another Irishman, Uber Boyo. I've been enjoying his content, both on Twitter and on his YouTube channel. He's a big Nietzschean, and he's just basically dedicated himself to understanding as best as he can the works of Nietzsche and his philosophy, and in particular how it's useful for us, for our time. And so I would recommend everyone check him out. And he seems like a very nice and fair man. He's open to conversation. He's open to debate. He's open to having his ideas, put through the rigors and come out the other side better for it. So yeah, he's been a really interesting character to have come across lately. Okay, so with the tech stuff out of the way, there's another thing that you mentioned that you wanted to talk about, which was, let's see if I have it here, the EU migration policy and the gumball theory. So what's all that about?
All right, let me just conclude about the tech. I'm sorry about this, Pox.
But no, that's fine.
Don't worry, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go on a long quotation or anything. No, just to say that the idea as well of technology, and one of the reasons why humanity in general embraces technology is because we have this idea that we can create paradise on Earth, and it never comes to pass. And I was reading, during my sickness, I was reading a John Updike novel. I think it was called the Valley of the Lilies or something like this, and it goes through 4 generations of a family. And at the start of the book, you have this kind of reverend or preacher or whatever. He has problems with his faith. He's struggling, and he decides that he doesn't believe in God anymore, and he wants to leave his job, which is a massive thing because the house he lives in is owned by the religious order, and his salary comes from the religious order, and he's kind of overeducated. He speaks like 7 or 8 languages. He's a scholar. But anyway, there's a scene where he's at a dinner party when he's still a reverend or whatever, and he's talking to the important people of the community, the rich people, the industrialists, and they're talking about the looms, and one of the industrialists is saying, there's a guy there who's kind of a socialist, whatever. He's saying that the worker is treated like a dog, and one of the industrialists says, Oh no! I'm telling you, we've increased our productivity and efficiency because the looms we have installed, they're kind of semi-autonomous now or whatever, so that the worker can actually use 3 looms at the same time instead of 1. And the socialist says, I guarantee you the worker's not getting 3 times the salary. And then the industrialist says, well, we increased the salary by 20%. And then the socialist says, I guarantee you it's gone back to the way it was. And the industrialist says, maybe it has. So there's this idea that, and the working class, include myself in this, we have this notion that technology will bring wonderful things to us, and it never works out that way because of corruption and greed from the higher echelons of society. So if you recall in Animal Farm by Orwell, the idea was the animals were going to build this utopia. They were going to build a windmill. All animals were equal, and it was all BS. The pigs the pigs took over, and the animals ended up in a worse situation than when they had Farmer Jones maltreating them. So that's something that should be said. And just to the final thing, like kind of a bright light at the end of the tunnel is that with complexity comes fragility. So as our societies become more and more complicated, they are prone to breaking down. And it only takes, you mentioned nuclear power plants being closed down. It only takes the power to go out for a few days and there's mayhem. So that's something to bear in mind. So yeah, the EU migration. I just saw something on Twitter about the EU was going to force all countries to take in colossal numbers of migrants, like numbers that hitherto we have not seen. We complain about things now. The numbers they're going to bring in will be, incredible, absolutely incredible. And when I saw this, I started thinking, how would you get this across to, to the normie? And then I remembered a few years ago, I saw a video. I presume you've seen it, but if you haven't, it was some guy, and he had these jars of gumballs, and he was more or less saying,
I figured that was what you're referencing there
right,
in the gumball theory. Yeah, I remember this. It's a classic.
It is, and it's great. I think it's really, because it's only, I think it's 6 minutes long, so you don't need to have a massive attention span for this clip. It's visual. The guy speaks very clearly. He shows you that, if we take in, I can't remember the numbers, but like he's talking about the United States. He shows you that there are, I don't know, in Africa, there are 1 point something billion people who earn less than $2 a day. And then in India, you have like 900 million people who earn less than $2 a day. And then the rest of Asia, I don't know, is 800 million. And then he talks about Latin America. And he has all, you've got all these big, huge jars of gumballs on one side. And then you've got a smaller jar representing, for example, the United States. It's still big enough, but it's smaller than the rest. And then he's like, we'll take in something like 20 million. Let's take in 20 million migrants in 1 year and see what difference it makes. And you can see it makes no difference whatsoever. However, it will make a difference in a country like the United States. It'll certainly make a difference in a country like Ireland. It's going to really put the infrastructure under pressure. It's going to cause civil strife, and it doesn't make a difference to world poverty. In fact, world poverty will probably be worsened by the whole thing, because they'll just continue doing the same thing and sending poor people across to Europe and all the rest. So I just thought, I thought it was worth mentioning.
There's a lot of interesting things that have been said about immigration lately, coming out of all sorts. Being back on Twitter is interesting, although I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on there. My account has been exploding in popularity ever since my triumphant return to that cesspool, and that's got the attention now of the jumped up hall monitors, reporting pretty much everything that I've said there. So I've already been locked twice out of my account in the past 24 hours. But on one occasion, I appealed and won that appeal, and it was settled pretty quickly, actually. And then very short amount of time passed, and I got hit with another notification saying that I'd been locked for some other tweet that someone had found worthy of reporting. Apparently, someone had reported me 90 times. So anyway, but being on Twitter has been interesting because you get to see a hell of a lot more, particularly coming from the other side. And today, just every day I get on Twitter, and including today, I saw someone who just they do the old Mott and Bailey tactic where they say that replacement migration, mass immigration is not happening, and then very very shortly after that, with a bit of poking and prodding, you get them saying, well, it is happening and it's a good thing. And then after that, a little bit more poking, a little bit more prodding, you get them saying, okay, not only is it not a conspiracy theory, okay, of course it's happening. And not only is it not a good thing, in fact, it's a very bad thing. It's revenge. You deserve it. It's payback. And this just is a constant occurrence, interacting with the people, the spiteful mutants, the bioletinists, the globalists, whatever you want to call them on Twitter. And just today, I saw that this woman, Melanie Vogel, who is apparently she's the co-chair of the European Greens. She's got all the correct stuff in her bio. She's got the European Union flag. She's got the rainbow. She's got I stand with Ukraine. All of that. She's a French senator. So for her to say, and this is in response to the Minister of Agriculture in Italy. This might be a bit of a long-winded explanation here, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. I'm not sure if you're aware, chat and TGP. Perhaps not, because it's outside the Anglosphere. But the Minister of Agriculture in Italy is this man. His last name is Lollobrigida. I think his first name is Federico. Well, just like most of the Fratelli d'Italia government, it's like just it's a bipolar government, in that they will do something very based and good on one day, and then the next day do something entirely different, very globalist and cringe and cuck. And so this Minister of Agriculture has, in the recent past, said that the government, the so-called neo-fascist, far-right, racist government of Giorgia Meloni, is working on a plan to bring in 500,000 migrants because it's good for the economy. They're going to do the jobs that Italians don't want to do, and it's okay because they're all going to come in legally. It's all of the typical boomer conservative blue-pilled catchphrases, blue-pilled justifications that we know aren't really justifications at all. And so that's his plan, that he wants to bring in a bunch of 500,000 migrant workers legally. The Treasury has released the results of an investigation, of a study, which the government, again, the far-right, neo-fascist, racist government, is seriously considering implementing policy based on this study, which argues that Italy needs to that if Italy increased its immigration by 33%, curious number for the schizos out there, something like if Italy increased its immigration by 33% or by 30%, it could reduce its public debts by 33% or 30%. One of them was 30, one of them was 33. By the year 2070. So in exchange for, the slow demographic annihilation of your people, you can reduce your public debts, caused by your decades of irresponsible governance by the year 2070, which is a very curious date because that's also the year which some demographers and analysts have said the Italians will be the minority in their own country. So that's the context to lead up to yesterday, I believe, or 2 days ago. This minister, Lollobrigida, gives a speech, and in it, he says that we will not accept ethnic replacement. He used the term ethnic substitution, but the translation would be like basically demographic replacement. And this caused quite a furore all over Twitter. Of course, on Italian Twitter, it was the talk of the entire site. And you had these, big official accounts, but also some other just, random individual Italian users with lots of people in their following, although they don't seem to be getting much interaction. So I don't know how much of that following is bots. But they were all saying, trying to deny the demographic replacement situation, or saying that it's a far-right racist conspiracy theory. One Italian account that had 50,000 followers that I responded to was using screenshots of English language media, to disprove, or to firstly to associate it with, Charlottesville racists and things like that. And then to further show that it's, it's a racist idea that comes out of the KKK or whatever, it comes out of the alt-right, all this stuff. And then I responded then, with other English language screenshots, showing him, the reality. We have the numbers. And again, these people brag about it as a good thing when the context is, yeah, it's happening and it's a good thing. It's diversity, it's enrichment, or it's payback, it's revenge, which is all the things I explained to these people on Italian Twitter. And so that is why this French senator and member of the European Greens, who even posted her tweet with the hashtag Lollobrigida, because he was trending all over Twitter. And she said, ethnic replacement is not a thing. Not in France, not in Finland, not in Germany, not in Italy, nowhere. It is a white supremacist, anti-Semitic, far-right conspiracy theory aiming at spreading racism, fear, and hatred to fuel populism and authoritarianism. And it's just amazing to see all of that packed into one tweet. Because she has the European Union flag in her bio, she's a French senator, and she's totally unaware of the European Union's own investigative research project called the BAM project, the BAM project, BAM standing for Becoming a Minority, in which the European Union funded and worked with academics all over Europe and institutions all over Europe to investigate what life is like in the European cities where the native Europeans have now become the minority. We have the receipts right in front of them. Their own institutions can't escape the reality of these things. But yet they continue to deny that it's happening. And so every time I see this, I just respond, especially to those who have the EU flag in their bio. Well, the very European Union, whose flag you have in your bio, the institution that you love and adore, that institution itself disagrees with you. That institution itself recognizes that this is, in fact, yes, it is indeed a thing. It is indeed happening. And then the further gaslighting, to say that it's not happening in countries like Germany, where the native Germans are the minority in Frankfurt, or in the UK, where the British population has gone down from being basically 100% now to somewhere around 80%, where the two largest cities, Birmingham and London, are now minority majority. This is well-known official data. France, the countries that she listed, England, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the gateway for all of these migrants, many of whom stay there in Italy, especially on these, this poor little island like Lampedusa. Okay, it's happening in Ireland. Again, another population projected to become the minority in our lifetimes, especially if you're a young listener, in your lifetime. The constant gaslighting that this is not happening. It really is shocking. I spoke about this with Woes. I thought that after being banned from Twitter for 2 years, being off of that for 2 years, and not really interacting with, shitlibs on a daily basis, and globalists and shills and all that. When I compare myself to who I was 2 years ago, the things that I've learned, the changes that I've gone through, the things that I've had to adapt to, realizations that I've made, it's like, even just in the past 2 years, I've advanced, I've evolved, I've become a lot sharper on some matters. I've been forced to become a lot sharper on some matters. And then you go back on Twitter and you just see that the shitlibs and the globalists and the bureaucrats, they are still in like 2016 mode. It's like they have not come up with anything else. They're just denying it, or then saying it's a good thing, or then saying it's payback. They have nothing else. They can only gaslight. But it really was curious and frustrating to see, literally in the space of days, Lollobrigida say, yeah, the Ministry of Agriculture is working to import 500,000 migrants, from God knows where, to do, I guess, I don't know, agricultural labor, since he's the Minister of Agriculture. And the Treasury is saying that, oh, yeah, we need to increase. Italy actually needs to increase immigration so that we can reduce debt in 50 years. And the government is taking that seriously. And then, just a few days later, he's out there making a speech, clearly using our language, saying that we are, Italy is not going to accept demographic replacement. Well, this is just, for me, it's Kali Yuga all the way. Because we cannot function in a time where, first of all, the mere acknowledgement that demographic replacement is happening gets greeted with such gaslighting, such slimy lying, and just straight lies, clear lies. And everyone starts getting into a hissy fit. My account has now been faced with someone trying to report 90 reports. Who knows why exactly, but because I'm on Twitter basically contesting this stuff every day. And we also can't function when those who do recognize that it's happening continue to betray us through policy, and then just give us a few scraps of red meat, red meat for the racists, for the gammon, with these little dog whistles. And they do this just so that we feel like, well, especially like in Italy, specifically, all the parties are shit, but at least Fratelli Italia has people in it that will acknowledge demographic replacement. So I guess I'll vote for them again. And I've said it before, that they ride this wave of nationalist sentiment to get into power, but they don't want to do anything to actually solve the problem that caused that nationalist wave, because that's their ticket to success. They need it. They need this mess, this demographic mess, because it's what they run on. And if they solve the problem, well, then they won't really have that much of a platform. What are they going to do? Be reduced to, economic arguments? So that's the context of all this stuff that's been going on Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, or if you follow, European politics, it's actually quite interesting. He caused quite a splash, and I think this is going to continue happening. Italy's going to be this strange bipolar entity that on one day is really going to piss us off, and then on the next day is going to do or say something quite based, and it's going to cause this massive overreaction or gaslighting reaction or denial from our adversaries, our enemies. So it's worth keeping an eye on things going on in Italy. Okay, so that was my long-winded rant. I know it's going to take a bit of a while to explain all that, but what are your thoughts on that then, German Pointer?
Yeah, before I get into it, just to say that while you're on Twitter, you've amassed, in the last whatever number of weeks, you've amassed a big following. You should probably shill your Odyssey channel and your YouTube channel before you get kicked off, you know. Yeah, so there is a meme. I saw it a few months ago, and I thought it was very funny. It shows the continent of Africa and the continent of Europe, and you have, let's say 10 black people in a little picture that's embedded in the continent of Africa, and then you've a picture of 10 white people in Europe embedded into the continent of Europe. And it gives a year. So I don't know, let's say it's 2010, and the Africans, the speech bubble is "help us" and exclamation mark. And the Europeans say, "come here." And then the next one is like 2050 or 2060. And you have the same one, on the continent of Africa. You've got 10 black people, and the speech bubble is "help us." And in Europe, you've got 10 black people, and they say "help us." So this is something that I am quite interested in, because we've been speaking about technology and technocratic state and the tyranny and all that. But I said at the start, that Europeans, I can see them struggling now with the technology, because it's evolved so fast, and as we've said, they haven't had time to adjust. But how are people with 65 IQ going to cope in this type of society? They can only cope if they're hemmed in like battery hens, really. That just someone comes and gives them food, puts food through a slot in the door, and they never get outside. Like, I can't countenance how you can have an advanced technological society, and, for example, let's say a country like Ireland, a small country, let's say you've 20 million people in the country with an IQ less than 80. And I'm not saying IQ is the be all and end all, but it's some sort of indication. How could you maintain an advanced technological society? And we only have to look at South Africa. That country had, top-notch infrastructure half a century ago. And now we hear about rolling blackouts. We hear that there's going to be a widespread famine because they just can't produce the food now, because they got rid of the Boers from the land, and the people who
Same
took
thing
over the
happened in
farms.
Zimbabwe,
Exactly.
formerly Rhodesia, formerly the paradise on earth. If you look at the images from the 70s and the 60s, Rhodesia. And yeah, now it's Zimbabwe, and it had the same thing. And I believe it was there where they had to appeal to the white farmers to come back because they had no food. They cannot maintain what Europeans build.
Yeah.
And this is not a hate thing. I'm on Twitter, and I can be a bit spicy sometimes. I've got some pretty based memes. And of course, it doesn't take much to set off, the lefty shitlibs. But for the most part, I certainly don't say anything very hateful. These are just inescapable facts, observations that not only Europeans make, rather. There's the documentary Empire of Dust, which is all about a Chinaman's experience working in Africa, because it's the Chinese who are colonizing Africa now. It's the Chinese who are taking all their resources which the natives don't even know exist and wouldn't know how to put them to use anyway, wouldn't even be able to access them. And it's the Chinese doing all of that. And in this documentary, which it's where we get the "it's all so tiresome" meme, this Chinese man even says to his African, translator, you had the Belgians came in here, and they gave you railways. They gave you, systems of transport, industrial transportation, industrial society. You had trains and rail lines that we didn't even have in China at the same time. So the Belgians came into Africa and developed stuff in Africa and gave you Africans things that we didn't even have in China. And then You complained about it. You complained about having the white man here. The white man then leaves, gives everything to you, gives you independence, and gives you everything that they brought. Just leaves it for you. All that infrastructure. And you couldn't even bother to maintain it. It's all decrepit. It's all dysfunctional. And even says it's such a shame. It is such a waste. It's painful to see so much, because this guy's a contractor. He's a developer. It's like, it's painful to see all this going to waste. And the African guy just, he doesn't have a response. He's just sitting there in shame, kind of nodding his head. And so when people say, we're going to take in all these people, what's the plan? The plan is for Ireland to have a population of 10 million at some point. I can't remember exactly who was the name of the Irish MP who said, we need to bring the Irish population up to 10 million. Of course, that's the plan of Ireland 2040, to increase the Irish population through immigration. It's a small island. The native population is only around 4 million anyway. So that's just pure ethnic cleansing right there. And then, again, do you expect a population comprised of Pakistanis and Somalians and Congolese to be able to maintain the first world level industrial technological society that exists in Ireland? Now, I have a conflicting thoughts on this, because I think that the technology will get to a point where it is self-sufficient enough that it doesn't matter the IQ of the people of the population. Which is to say that basically, the tech will make everything so convenient that even a low IQ person can use it. And then the tech will kind of just be functioning on AI mega servers that really don't require any human to monitor them. And thus we can have first world countries flooded with third world peoples, and yet there won't be massive dysfunction. However, when it comes to things like, nuclear power plants, nuclear submarines, public transport, driving the trams and the trains, making the trains run on time, literally making the trains run on time, and things like that. All of that, I do suspect, will suffer because of the prevalence of people who either aren't clever enough, can never become clever enough, or simply just aren't used to this kind of technology in their own countries and won't be able to adapt to it in ours. Certainly not to the extent of operating it themselves. Maybe, it doesn't take much to step on a tram, but to operate one, maybe a Syrian refugee isn't quite capable of that. In fact, we know, because that happened in Germany. A Syrian refugee who was basically a diversity hire in some German cities' public transport system ended up crashing the tram. And so we have the proof already. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think the technological society is self-maintaining, or do you think it is going to collapse under the weight of immigration? Do you think one of these forces is like a immovable object, and the other one is an unstoppable force?
I've thought about this a lot, and I've been on the fence, and then sometimes I've thought what you've just said, that the system will be good enough, but unless they have something up their sleeve, that we know nothing about, I just can't see it. I just can't see a system being maintained when you've got the colossal numbers. We, like, for example, where I am now, half of the city is populated, let's say 65-70% of half the city is populated by people from the third world. So if you go there to the supermarket, some days you'll find that you're the only European in the supermarket, and you have Bangladeshis and Africans, and they're filling their trolleys with food. Now, in this same part of the city, if you're walking around at 8 o'clock in the morning, you won't see any diversity. You won't see, which is the time when people are going off to work, for example. You won't see them You won't see them at 9 o'clock in the morning. You won't see them at 10 o'clock. About 11, you'll start seeing them. And then as the day continues, you'll see more of them. And they're just walking around, in their kind of pajamas and chatting away on their phone, sitting on benches in the sun, trying to get some heat from the sun and talking on their phones. And, they're not adding anything to, they're gaining everything from the system. And this is something I've thought about as well, that, there is a tropical mindset where you have resources within arm's reach. You can feed yourself easily. You walk down the savannah or whatever, and you see somebody you don't know, and you cook them and you eat them. Or you see, you dig up the ground not too deep, and you find a few larvae and you eat them. You go out and you kill I don't know, some sort of wild animal, and you can eat for a week. And in this tropical place, you're not going to need to be inventive. You'll never erect a 2-story building. You'll never contemplate the notion of the wheel. You'll be stuck in a sort of forever land. And in Europe, we have created these, through technology, we've created these situations whereby people from the third world can get all the food they want in Europe. They can eat themselves silly, and if you see some of them, they're absolutely massive, where they're just eating constantly. They're consuming calories and calories and calories. You see them in the supermarket and the trolley is holding them up, so they don't feel cold because they get heating, and the government makes sure they get heating. They all get accommodation. They have keys to an apartment. They won't leave the apartment for hours and maybe days at a time, and then they'll go out, and whatever. So the people who are not inventive from an evolutionary perspective have everything to gain in the technological society, whereas we Europeans who have this kind of rural soul, we're the ones who don't benefit by this system. We absolutely loathe the system, and therefore it would make sense for the system to replace the creative and the inventiveness of the European with the tropical mind, the tropical individual. But as I say, I just don't see the system being maintained. As I said, unless they have something incredible up their sleeve, I don't see it. And I think the system will, if they take in the numbers which they've been taking in of late. And this is another thing. Enoch Powell, in his speech, the Rivers of Blood, I think it was the anniversary there recently. Like when I heard that for the first time, people were on about this part of the speech and that part. The one word that stuck out in my mind was dependence. A number of dependents, he said, dependents. And they depend on the system. Practically all of them that have come here in the last 2 decades, they depend completely on the system. Most of them don't work. And we get the stats. We get the stats. For example, in Ireland, I can't remember, was it something like 80-something% of sub-Saharan Africans don't work? They don't.
One stat that I've seen recently is that while PPS requests from the native Irish are like 10,000 for calendar year 2022, it was over 55,000 from the foreign population. So they are just coming into Ireland and then going on the dole in massive numbers compared to the native population.
And they never go back. I've never heard of a single African who moved to England or Ireland who looked around, maybe spent a year or two and said, I don't like it here. I'm going to move back to Botswana. I'm going to move back to Nigeria. I've never heard of it.
In fact, talking about Twitter interactions, I had this hilarious exchange on Twitter where all of these blacks in Britain were responding to this black barrister who had tweeted about how she went to Jamaica and Harlem in New York and she felt so invigorated being around her own kind. And then she said something to the effect of, I wonder if not being around this much diversity, or in her case, not being around this many Black people who look like her, had an effect on my childhood. If only Britain had more diversity. But of course, the language being used here is not accurate. What she wants to say is, if only Britain had more Blacks, more Africans, so that she could feel more at home. And it's like, well, then you're taking away the feeling that you just enjoyed being in Jamaica and being in Harlem, of being around your own people. You're taking that from the native white European British people should also be allowed to be around their own kind and have that feeling of belonging and that invigoration as well. No, surely no. No. Then as people were responding to her tweet and it started to get a lot of attention and people were saying exactly that, she doubles down and she starts getting all sassy. And what was hilarious was that the comments in support of her were from all these other Blacks, all these other Africans, talking about how they too had these wonderful experiences of feeling a feeling of belonging when they went on holiday in Sierra Leone, or when they went back to their ancestral African country, or whatever African country their grandparents or relatives are still living in. And they get this wonderful feeling of belonging and being around people of their own kind, and they just feel like the culture is so it's so easy to adapt to that it feels like going home. And the most incredible thing happened. Obviously, predictably, many people responded, well, then go back, or then stay there. Go there and stay there. You're obviously happy there. We'll obviously be happier without you. We can all get along in the places where we evolved, the nations that we created, and the cultures that we developed, amongst the people that we like being around. It's a win-win. And yet then the response to those comments from those Twitterers saying, well, go there then and stay there, the response was, make me. You wish. I bet you wish that. Nope, I'm not going anywhere. And it's like, you just said that you felt great there, that it felt like going home, that you really enjoyed it, that you love being surrounded by your own kind. No white people around, all a bunch of Blacks, doing your thing. You loved it. And so someone says, all right, well then stay there. Make me. Fuck you, whitey. It's just so bizarre. And yet this is the resentment that is created, particularly because they come to our countries through invitation. They are invited here. They don't have to do anything to come here. They don't have to earn it. They didn't earn coming here. They were invited here. They were ushered in. And then they don't have to do anything to earn their stay. No, they just go on state benefits. And so they see us as suckers. They see us as a cow to be milked. And then, of course, that means that they don't respect us at all. They're playing us for fools. They know it. And those of us who know it too and who object, well, then, of course, we're resentful of them. And so it creates this very low trust, high stress, high tension, resentful society. It is unbelievable the damage that is being done. It's unbelievable sometimes when I reflect on this age that I'm growing up in, that I'm living in comparison to what it was in my childhood, how bad things have got, and how good they could have been were it not for this evil experimentation. It really is sobering. It really is depressing, honestly. But it is something to think about. How is it all going to work? The imposition of the technological society, plus turning first world nations into third world nations. It does seem like maybe the schizos are right. The idea is to just put us all in this high-tech, brave new world sort of prison planet. We'll all be just clever enough to do menial labor. We'll all be just clever enough to consume product, not clever enough to think of any alternative or to realize that we are imprisoned, not clever enough to do anything about it. And we'll all be ruled over by this eugenic ruling class, which I doubt that as well, because I see that the degeneracy and the dysgenics is also affecting the so-called elite. So it seems like, again, people are making these experiments. They're taking things apart without knowing how to put them back together, and nobody is really thinking about the consequences of all of this. They're just looking at line going up, or they're just motivated by anti-white hatred, or they're just motivated by Zionist prophecy fulfillment, or whatever. And I am beginning to think now that it's not this monolithic entity behind closed doors making all these decisions. It's various power centers on a web of power. And sometimes their objectives come into competition with one another. I don't know if I'm missing something there, or what you think about that, but that's kind of where I'm at now.
You certainly are missing something, young man. Lest we forget, the Africans. There is a positive story. They did indeed try to move back to Africa and set up their utopia, and it was just a success from start to finish in a country called Liberia. And it was
Indeed.
it's now number one. If you ever look at the standard of living, it's number one 20 years in a row. So there you go.
Yeah.
They can do it. We just need to be less cynical.
They were even given the very Constitution of the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was. It seemed to be a.
And it's such a shame too, because George Weah is the president over there. No, if anybody can lead them to the promised land, it's got to be good old George Weah. For those of you who might not remember or know, George Weah was I believe a Ballon d'Or winning striker for AC Milan back in the day when Italian football ruled the roost.
Wasn't there something about his age? They didn't know how old he was. He didn't have a birth certificate or something. And
probably
when
that
clubs were going
so
to
often.
when clubs were going to buy him, like they didn't know if he was 30 years of age or 40 years of age.
That's happened several times, even in recent years. That's happened. There's been a few cases in Italy in particular, but also around Europe and European football clubs, where they sign these Africans, and then a lot nowadays players, especially when they get signed by a top club, they go through pretty rigorous physical testing, including dental, and you can usually tell even if a player is going to have health problems. You can tell lots of that from a person's teeth, and apparently even there's this one case where a player, through his dental work, was determined to be older than he said he was. And so the club is like, we just signed a 45-year-old. What are we doing? I think it was Lazio 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, there's another thing I often say to people. I should say as well that there is this meme or whatever that goes around from time to time, and it's like I'd prefer to rule over a mound of ashes than to lose my position. So there is this idea that there are people at the top and they do not want to abdicate, and they would prefer things to go south than to abdicate. Just another thing, like I've often spoken to people and about the race thing as well, and what I do is I ask them, do they think that culture is derived from genetics or from race? And they'll immediately go, absolutely not. How could you say such a thing? We're all human beings. And then I mention all the sub-Saharan African countries, including Haiti, because it's populated by sub-Saharan Africans. And I always say, why are they always the lowest in terms of standard of living and whatever else, and poverty? And they always say it's because of colonialism, And then I say to them, there is a country, if you go to 1950, give or take, early 50s, there was a country that was at the very bottom of GDP. So they had the lowest salaries per year. They had the lowest standard of living, and within just a couple of decades, that country was on its way to becoming, a first world country. A country called South Korea. It was colonized by the Japanese for a long time, and then there was the Korean War, which destroyed the country even more. And that country could, it could turn it around, if you know what I mean. So I say, what is the difference? Like, how come you've got, let's say, 55, 56 sub-Saharan African countries in the world, and not one of them can gain a standard of living similar to South Korea? What is the common denominator here? And they just go quiet. They just go quiet because they can't answer it. They don't know. They don't want to enter that realm of thinking.
Yeah.
They want to avoid it.
It's always entertaining also asking them, well, if it's all the same, we're all the same. Or particularly today, one of the reasons I got my Twitter account blocked today, it was a risk. I knew it. I thought maybe I could get away with it. And the tweet was up long enough for it to get quite a lot of attention, which was, in my estimation, then worth it. But there was this woman who tweeted at me saying, you'll never be able to stop blacks from moving into Europe, and you will fail and you will die knowing that you failed. And I responded saying, be careful what you wish for. That's not a threat. It's a word of caution. You might think that filling my home with the detritus of the world is a cool way to own the racists. But I'm actually looking out for your best interest. And I tweeted a picture of some victims, some white women who met a gruesome end at the hands of diversity. And when these people say things like, oh, you'll never stop, the blacks are coming, you can't do anything about it, and we're all the same, and there's no differences, and everything is fine, and the only reason why African countries are such shite is because of colonialism and all that. Well, I always ask them, okay, well, tell me the African country that you would like to live in. Just tell me the sub-Saharan African country that you would prefer living in compared to a European country. I'm waiting. If you could live in the Congo, if you could live in Somalia, if you could live in Sudan, if you could live in even fucking South Africa now, you could unfortunately add that, Zimbabwe. Okay, would you rather live in any of those countries, or would you rather live in, and I'll even pick, struggling European countries. Would you rather live in southern Italy? Would you rather live in Andalusia? Would you rather live in, Portugal, any of the pigs countries, Greece? Of course, the comparison or the proposition is even more stark if you offer them Sweden, Germany, Denmark. There is never a response. They never have a response to that. It's always just a huge seething, cascade of angry cope. Usually, it's like, oh, well, if it wasn't for, again, they just go right back to the colonization, or Rwanda is doing well now. Rwanda is one of the most successful countries in Africa. Okay, great. Would you rather live there or Germany? Would you rather live there or Japan? South Korea, as you mentioned. This is something that's very interesting that people have said about liberals, white liberals. Think, champagne socialist types in the United States, these types of people. They always vote, lefty and immigration, all these things. But in every other aspect of the way they live, they are more race real than some people on our side. They're always the first to find a way to block, a mixed race school or an intercity school, or desegregating the school districts the way it is in the United States. They're always the first to say, no, we want our all white school district. We want our high IQ, high first world society schools. We don't want to get the riffraff in. They will do whatever it takes to keep their pristine white enclaves as they are. Of course, they couch it in this smarmy language of liberals and progressives, But the end result is that they get to have their little white ethnostates. And yet these are people who, when it comes time to vote, will continue voting for the open borders policies and mass migration policies, that their behavior indicates they are fully aware are destructive.
Yeah, when I spoke to Southern Nordic a while back, I mentioned the gun ownership in Switzerland and how it has the lowest gun crime in the world, and you have a country like Honduras which is very strict on guns, and yet they have the highest gun crime in the world. And I remember speaking to a few people, and I brought this statistic up, and I was shot down immediately by these people. They were young enough people, but idealists, whatever. They said, "Oh, you can't. Come on, man, you can't compare Honduras with Switzerland." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "You just can't." And I said, "But tell me why I can't compare Honduras with Switzerland." And they were kind of stammering, they were trying to, and they said, "Well, they're completely different countries." And I said, "But, that doesn't mean I can't compare them." And then I said, "How about if I compare Switzerland with Sweden? Would that be fair?" And they said, "Yeah, that's fine. That's fine." And I said, "How about I compare Switzerland with Poland?" And they said, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I said, "How about Switzerland and Austria?" "Yeah, that's fine. That's fine." So I said, "You know what? I think it's got something to do with race here, guys." And they said, "No, no, no, it's nothing to do with race." I said, "Well, I've just named countries that are racially similar to Switzerland, and you said it's fine to compare them. But as soon as I choose a country with a different race, you're going ballistic saying that I can't compare a European country, genetic more or less. Well, it's changing, but genetically a European country to a country that's got very little in terms of European demographics." And I finally said, "Guys, you know what? I think it's race." I said, "I think the difference is race, and I think you're afraid to say it." And this is the thing with these liberal-minded people. I think deep down they know they're living a lie, and they hate when you reveal it. It's kind of like that kid's story, "The Emperor Has No Clothes." They're the sort of people who will be shouting out to the emperor, "That's a magnificent hat you're wearing, Emperor. I love your new coat, Emperor." And you're that boy who shouts out, "The emperor is bollock naked," and they go ballistic. "How dare you say that? Look, he's wearing the nicest clothes." So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with
Sure.
people who are very, very infantile, and
And it is
very dangerous.
a good analogy to that story, because for a lot of people, especially the ones with positions of influence and power, their status depends on saying that the emperor looks amazing in his fabulous new coat. I mean, we call it virtue signaling nowadays, but it's worth remembering what exactly is the point of virtue signaling. It's to either maintain or increase your status. You have to lie. You have to say the emperor looks fantastic if you want to maintain your comfortable position in this day and age, in this society. And that's why those of us who say the emperor's naked, we're not enjoying no one is losing their Twitter accounts because they're saying demographic replacement isn't happening and you're racist. No one's going to lose their Twitter account for that. No one's going to lose their job for saying, yeah, let them come in. They're fantastic. There are no differences. We all bleed red. We're all the same. You're not going to lose your job for voicing that opinion. It's those of us who are saying the emperor is naked that run those risks.
Yeah, and that feeds into the whole trans pronoun debacle. You want me to say that the emperor is wearing the nicest clothes, and if I don't do it, you'll try and get me, fired from my job. You'll try and get my bank account closed down. I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. I'm not gonna pretend.
This is a good comment here from Tom Seaver. It is about status. I thought the term luxury opinion deserved to stay in the lexicon. That is a good term. It's the first time I've heard of it. It's kind of ringing a bell, but I think I've not really seen that used too much. But it is very good. A luxury opinion. I mean, I have said on occasions to my interlocutor, to my opponent, or whatever, or in these long streams, I have said that to be a leftist, to be a shitlib, to be an open borders type, these are luxuries. You to believing that importing millions, in some cases, in 1 year, 1 million people into your country from various places in the third world, and that won't have an effect, and that doesn't, it's a very shallow, nihilist thing to say. These people who say, "Oh, I don't care what happens in the future, I'll be dead." Who cares? Oh, who cares about culture? What is that anyway? Who cares about, your bloodline, your kinfolk? I've had people saying that to have any sort of connection to your people and your land, well, that's just stuff from fantasy fiction like Game of Thrones. This is reality. These people are so detached. The modern lobotomized libtard is just so detached. But that's a luxury, to be able to think like that, and to be able to live like that, and to be unaffected by the consequences of these this reshaping of the world, basically. What a luxury. Sometimes when the shitlib says, "Oh, why do you care so much? Man, it must be so awful to be a racist. What a miserable life. Just, let it go. Stop caring. It must be miserable to be a little racist like you." Well, in a way, they are right. When you look at what is happening to something you care about a great deal, let's just take, for example, the Irish people. When I look at what's happening in Ireland, when I think about what I've seen happening in Ireland in the times that I've been there, when I think about the idea of returning to an Ireland that is no longer Irish because the Irish are gone, and in their place are Arabs and Pakistanis and Africans, that does make me feel miserable, to be honest. It's a miserable thing to think about. Because I'm not a nihilist, though. Because I do care about these things. And because I do realize that if you just transplant people, and this term, the new Irish, the other day I saw a promotional video. It starts off with a black man saying, "Hello, my name is click clack ding ding dong doo. I'm a Nigerian Irish." And the whole video is about getting these new Irish to participate in local elections and even stand in local elections, and all the information of how you can do so. And it's just a video of Africans, fist bumping and smiling on camera and doing stuff on camera while jingle jangle music plays in the background. And this Nigerian man uses the term New Irish. Well, New Irish implies that the native Old Irish are to be replaced. If you have a new bicycle, what are you going to do with your old bicycle? What is the point of getting a new bicycle? Because you don't want to use the old one. You're replacing it. And so when I think about an Ireland full of these new Irish, no, as a person who cares and as a person who realizes, well, that's not Ireland at all. That's not Irish at all. So yeah, it is a miserable thing. But because I'm not a shallow, lobotomized nihilist with luxury opinions, I have to deal with this weight on my mind every moment of my life. And it's what I've dedicated my online persona to talking about and trying to oppose and trying to open up the eyes of the normies so that we get more people on our side. It would be a luxury not to have to worry about these things. Absolutely would be a luxury. And so, yeah, when these people say, "Oh, you must be a miserable little racist." Yeah, I fucking am. Thanks to you and your luxury opinions. Thanks to you and your fucking opinions and the consequences of them that do not affect you. Because you live somewhere in Silicon Valley, or you love the wide variety of kebab shops you think is such an improvement. It's fucking pathetic.
They don't have to live, generally these people who profess to love endless mass migration, they tend not to live in the middle of it. And these are the people who will they lecture you about how Ukraine is Ukraine is for the Ukrainians, and they don't want to see Russia taking it over. It's for the Ukrainians. They'll say similar things about the Palestinians, but in their own country, they just despise, their fellow ethnic people, and especially the working class. It's a class thing as well. It is a class thing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. To the extent that class, exists. I was talking to Greg Johnson about this. I mentioned the same thing. We don't really have landed gentry and nobles and things like that. So when you say like working class, everyone is basically working, including the wealthiest people got their wealth through enterprise, through labor. I suppose there is still a nobility in Britain, and some other parts of Europe have royal families and things like that. But nowadays, class is determined by your wealth, not really your position as far as like hereditary nobility and things like that, or land ownership. But still, it is at play. The low income people, those who drive our buses, clean our streets, or just basically work wage jobs. The wage cucks, which is not a term I ever use. I don't like that. And then you've got those are the people then suffering the consequences of the luxury opinions of the office drone, or the the e-girl working in some Silicon Valley tech company, and that is a definite distinction. There is a definite sort of class distinction here, but it's status achieved through your wealth. And it just seems like, and then again, we see how people with wealth behave. Where do they do? Where do they move? Where do they go? To white enclaves, it's just, and then when you call this out, they call you all sorts of names, and they try to suspend your Twitter account.
I was going to say earlier, you said that someone denounced you 80 times. That sounds to me like a jilted
90, apparently.
90. All right. It could be 100 by now when we were talking. But
Yeah.
that sounds to me, you know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like to me a jilted senorita. That's what that sounds like.
Yeah. It's the thing that you've got that much time to troll through my Twitter account and just reporting everything I've tweeted. It's amazing. Nothing at all to do all day except play hall monitor. Okay, we've been going for over 2 hours. I don't want to keep you too long here, so let's see what else was on the list of things to talk about. And then, of course, we can also take some questions from the chat. So do chip in with anything on your mind as well, questions or comments. The Odyssey, I think, is just pretty much given up there. Although, again, now I see that there's even more people watching on Odyssey, so maybe it is fine over there.
I see Southern Nordic is in the chat there.
Yeah, Southern Nordic is in the chat. I was trying to, I had invited him on. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us, but I do want to get him back on a Pox and Friends stream soon. Always good to hear his thoughts. Okay, so let's do this one. Let's end on the positive note that you mentioned here. So summer is coming. It's a great time to do real life things. Ask women out on dates, for example. So let's end on the positive note. What are your hopes, your expectations for summer? And I do have to say, the past few summers have been very white boy summer indeed. If we think back to some of the things that have happened in previous summers, they were pretty enjoyable as far as, social events, cultural events, meta-political events. So maybe this will be another white boy summer. What do you think?
It's possible. It's possible. Yeah, I would just say, like, despite all the doom and gloom, we have to remain optimistic. We have to enjoy something, even if it's only something very small that lasts for 10 minutes in our day, but we have to enjoy the good things as well. And yeah, I just mentioned to you that we could try and finish off on a positive note, and we've spoken about technology. A lot of people now in the real world Uh, Guys, in particular, they don't. I don't see it happening anyway. They don't seem to ask women out on dates in real life. They use dating apps and whatever else. They become essentially a number on a spreadsheet. So, I recommend men should be men. They should be active. And if you see a woman you find attractive, you get any sort of signal offer, she could be working in the supermarket. This is the advantage of not using the checkout, whatever, uh, unless you want to ask a machine out on a date. You can ask the woman out on a date. You can ask her for her number. If she spurns your advances, it's not the end of the day. There will be other women, but I think it's important for men to start being active in real life in terms of looking for a partner, because obviously we want our ethnic groups to continue into the future. This is why we do these streams. So yeah, summer's coming. It's a time to be active. It's a time to be outdoors, and it's a time to enjoy nature.
Yeah, I would just say too, to that end of going out and chatting with people, meeting people, trying your luck with a lady. We can't let ourselves become Arno Brecker statues. I see a lot of this happening because of our online community. We it's a strange thing because we talk a lot about the great man has to forge himself out of iron. He is both the hammer and the marble that he sculpts to become this great Ubermensch, and we have to embrace the struggle and all these things. And that's very typical of National Socialist ideology. It's very typical of Nietzschean philosophy, that to become great, you have to go through the crucible. And I think we've really embraced that, certainly aesthetically. And you get a lot of, guys online, keyboard warriors puffing out their chests, trying to, pass themselves off as that sort of thing. But at the same time, life has to be a bit of fun too. You have to enjoy yourself as much as you can. Like I said, I spend a lot of time with the burden of this Kali Yuga that we're going through on my mind. And certainly I think since 2020 in particular, I know that my life will never be the same. What happened where I live, what happened in my life, and the ripple effects that I'm still, swimming in since then. I just know that my life is never going back to the way it was. But in any case, for those of you who weren't affected so much by that or whatever, and I do this as well, you still have to go out and have some fun. You still have to have friends. And if you're single, I know, depending on where you're at, I know that in America, for example, the dating situation is really bad. But in other countries, perhaps it's not as grim. Don't be an Arno Brecker statue. Like, go out, have some fun. Have a bit of enjoyment from time to time. And of course, yeah, in the summer, why not? Try and strike up a conversation with that pretty girl. And yes, it is true that in many modern situations, meeting other people, meeting a girl will be in the context of a pub, and maybe you don't like to drink, or maybe you don't want to do that anymore. You don't like that scene anymore. I understand that. I understand that totally. And of course, it can be very complicated now, legally even, particularly in a country like Spain, as you know, German Pointer, how dangerous it can be legally now, just flirting or striking up a conversation with a female. This is just the times we're in, but I do agree that it's still something that's worth doing. And usually you can tell if the girl is up for your attention. It's usually pretty obvious.
She'll give you signs. She'll give you signs.
And then also too, like you were saying, get active. This is something I feel kind of useless here in this small Spanish town. I'm not really interested in local politics here. I think this town is never going to change. It's the way it is. I never even expected to be here as long as I've been here. And even though I have been here, a handful of years, I know that I don't belong here. It's not my place, and not entirely interested in, putting down roots and becoming a giri forever. But if I were to go, that route, and this is something I would suggest to anyone who does have that, sense of belonging. They have a community. They're involved in their local, neighborhood, town, whatever. Getting active. I would love to see our guys, instead of worrying about getting girls, because I've seen this a relatively well-known American on our side who's recently just decided to call it quits entirely. He was recently bemoaning the fact that the dating scene is terrible, and the dissident right, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't help put dissident men or nationalist men and women together. He was basically pining for a political movement or political community to be a social scene, and that's really not the point of this thing. It could be a latent effect, a latent sort of benefit of it, but it's not really the objective. And then I got thinking about it, and I was thinking, it is a mostly male community. Mostly men are interested in these things. Women don't tend to be very interested in these things anyway. So their presence is not only is it not a bad thing, it's also not inexplicable. And then I was thinking, for guys like this fellow who was feeling a bit down, and for a lot of other guys who are living these quiet lives of desperation, and the dating market is terrible, and the quality of women is terrible, and they're pretty decent guys. They're trying to be, at least. I think, at least on our side of things, I'm sure that there are some absolute neats and overweight, useless wanker types. But I do want to believe that the guys on our side are, in the gym. They are reading books. They are trying to develop both mind and body. And it can be pretty grim if you're thinking, okay, well, what's the quality of women out there? Well, instead of worrying about all of that, I would rather see our guys forming mannerbunds, forming a choreos, a sort of Peaky Blinders mafia, where they can go out in a group and run the town, run the show, and do martial arts training together, do anything, just socializing, but a group of guys with like-minded ideas, like-minded values, looking out for each other. And particularly if you live in places with lots of wildlife, to use our friend Solar Nordics euphemism there, to go out and start making it your purpose to let your people know you're here. Let them know that you're not going to trash our neighborhoods. You're not going to predate on our women and girls. And I think that actually, by forming these manner buns and by going out into society and trying to leave a mark on it and imposing yourselves on your community in a positive way, that will attract the ladies because they love confidence. So maybe that's something for the chat to think about. Instead of worrying about, I would love to get a girlfriend. Well, maybe instead think about getting a manner bun together, and all the different things that could do, and the activities you could get up to. I don't know. That's something that's been on my mind lately. And as summer comes around, perhaps it's more doable.
I'll say that there are some girls now who are starting to realize that the system isn't going to provide for them. They're noticing the changing demographics as well. They're feeling less safe when they walk down the street. So they're looking less upon the state than they are upon men, European men. So some women are coming around to the idea that they must depend less on the state and more on European men. So that is a positive as well.
Yeah, and I seem to be observing this trend. I don't know if it's just e-girls, if it's just pick-me's, thoughts trying to go in the direction of e-culture, wherever that's going. But it does seem like there's been this surge in women online speaking out against feminism, the lies that they were told about feminism. I don't know if the tranny intrusion into women's spaces has done something to also maybe ignite the fire underneath these complacent women, and now they've realized that they're in the crosshairs too, they're on the chopping block too, and maybe they're also realizing that all of this stuff is the consequence of, in part, the previous waves of feminism. I think I don't know if it's because the internet has a way of curating itself for you, so maybe this is false. This is just my corner of social media showing me the stuff that the algorithm thinks I'm interested in seeing. But it does seem like there's this plethora of like young women with podcasts, and they're all saying, we were lied to. I wish I could just be a stay-at-home mom. Women need to shape up. How can you be so demanding of men to be still masculine and providers like their fathers and grandfathers, and yet you don't even know how to cook. You don't even know how to raise a family. You have no interest in having children. All you do is offer sex. So of course, that's all men think of you as, a sex object, because you don't offer them anything else. What are you offering them? And I'm seeing lots of women, lots of young women, making TikToks about this, doing podcasts about this. I don't know if that's just, again, like I said, the algorithm showing me these kind of things, or if it's truly a new sort of reaction to Weimar 2.0. I'm not sure, but I hope it's genuine, and I hope it continues to spread.
There's something I noticed. So recently, I won't say I've begun watching Spanish TV, but at lunchtime, if I'm cooking something, I just turn it on, so it's in the background. But any time I flick through the channels, I've noticed, you've all these talk shows, and all the women are about 70 years of age. The hair is peroxide blonde. They're showing their hanging baskets, their cleavage. They're dressed like sluts. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking, how do young Spanish women feel? Like, they must feel that there's no future for them. You've got all these elderly women dressed like sluts, trying to be sexy on every single channel, in a lot of advertisements, whatever. And you've got no young, beautiful, feminine women on TV. So I think there must be some sort of subconscious message there where they say, well, that's not the way to go. There's no market there for us anymore for young, beautiful, fertile women. You've got all these women who just don't want to retire. They never want to retire, and they want to pretend that they're 19, 20 years of age. So I think that's something else. It must reach the mind of the young women that something has gone wrong. The government, all the channels, they're promoting sterility, and they're using these elderly women and trying to present them as sexy, energetic young women.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what the femoids are getting up to these days. All right, so let's go for another couple of minutes here. We'll take some questions from the YouTube chat. Again, if you guys want to send super chats to the entropy, I'll share that one more time. But there's the link. Yeah, so have you got any plans then for the summer, German Pointer? What are you going to get up to? Seems now that the world has gone back to somewhat normal travel circumstances.
Yeah, I'll probably move at the end of June. I haven't decided where to go yet. I have a few places in mind. I'd like to get back writing, possibly fiction. And I am thinking, and this is one of the positives of technology. I am thinking of starting a Substack. All the cool kids are doing it, including yourself. So
indeed.
you said in one of our first chats that it's very useful that you can use the enemy's printing press against it.
Hmm.
So
Exactly.
something like
Exactly.
that. So I think it's a good idea. It's like having your own little newspaper, and
Hmm.
you can write as much or as little as you want, once a month or once every 2 weeks. Write an article, even if you have 5 followers or something. It gets you writing, which is good because
Hmm.
that, as you know, writing brings clarity to your thoughts. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm thinking
I've
of
also
that.
seen
I
it
have a
said that's someone said that's great to see a lot of us on Substack now, because so many of us do these streams, these lengthy streams. So many of us make video content, but it's difficult to remember exactly what was spoken about or what was said in a stream that goes on for 3 hours. It's difficult to have that information on hand, a data point, an anecdote, a useful argument, or an interesting story. But if you write it down into a well-organized and well-written essay or article, and then it's on your Substack, well, it's accessible. You can screenshot it. You can highlight the particular paragraph or phrase in question or that you need. So yeah, I think there's all sorts of use to going back to writing and just putting things down on writing. And Substack, it seems the ADL targeted it, and Twitter now won't link to it. You have to go through like a warning uh, label or something to if you want to go to a Substack link via Twitter. Um, but Substack um, has proven, I suppose, knock on wood, uh, it's proven to be a pretty pro free speech. While Twitter was censoring people like Dr. Robert Malone during the COVID madness, Substack did not take down his writings. Um, so why not use it? It's a very well designed platform. It's very sleek, looks good. You can make it look however you want according to your own aesthetic tastes as well. So yeah, there's all sorts of reasons why we should use it. And I'd be interested to see how you express yourself in writing. I think that'd be very, very interesting indeed. What do you think, by the way, with the warm weather coming? In a country like Spain, when the summer comes, usually people tend to get quite lethargic because it's just so hot. But in a country like Ireland, the warm summer months tend to be much more conducive to going out and being more sociable. What do you think will be the effect then of the warmer summer months on the protests and blockades of these, quote unquote, migrant centers or hotels and things like that? Um, I wonder what's going to happen this summer in Ireland. I think some great things might happen. Certainly momentous things.
I don't know. I don't know how it'll pan out, but I'm guessing, if you do get, let's say, a week of sunshine, which doesn't happen every year in Ireland, sometimes there is no summer in Ireland. It's just drizzling all the time and it's windy, and it's the same as the other seasons. But if they do get a week, obviously, I don't know. Like I suspect people will try and enjoy, enjoy the good weather and go to the beach, etc. They might be less inclined to protest, but it depends on what happens because it's a powder keg. They're bringing in undocumented migrants. These guys are going to get up to all sorts of shenanigans, and there will be a reaction. Obviously, if you have kids and some undocumented migrant puts his hand on one of your kids, you're going to go mental and you're going to talk to your neighbors, and it could escalate very quickly. So yeah, it just depends on what happens. Like we spoke last year about what happened in Sligo, and the
Mm-hmm.
media is very powerful. They were very quickly able to kind of divert attention on that and make out that um, it was just it was just a sort of an accident, misunderstanding.
An
You
isolated
know,
incident.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Let's see what happens. But as I say, the ingredients are there for a powder keg. Yeah, because it's a small country, small
Yeah.
population, and it's being
And it
overwhelmed.
does
Like
seem like the Irish are, not to play into a stereotype, but they are fighting back a little bit. It does seem like, in a country like Austria, okay, a migrant will do something horrible at a public swimming pool or something, or a girl will be abused or even worse. And, there'll be public outcry. The media will do its bit to sweep it under the rug, and then life continues. Well, it seems like the Irish are actually, like, I've seen lads standing in front of a bus full of migrants, blocking its path and telling it to fuck off the other direction, go away. I've never seen that in another country in Europe. I've never seen anyone doing that. And I can only
Because
imagine
it's
now that if...
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. Well, I was
Because
just going
it's
to
a
say
small
that...
country. Because it's a small country, people talk, and
Yeah,
if they'll see, for example, they'll see some factory, abandoned factory. Suddenly, you've got electricians going in there and carpenters, and the word gets around.
yeah. Or
And then
they're
they'll,
using schools. They're using schools as a dumping site for these people. It's just
yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah.
And I can
It's
imagine
horrible
now
what's
if in
happening.
the summer, these people are going to be out and about. If the weather is nice, these new arrivals, and we know what they get up to, especially the ones from Afghanistan, but all of them in general. I can just imagine if one of them does something similar to what's happened in countries like Germany, Austria, Sweden, France. I really do think the Irish are not going to let that pass unnoticed and unpunished. So I've said this many times, that I knew that Ireland would be affected by this. I knew that the globalists would put Ireland in the crosshairs, and it was going to be terrible because it's a small country, because the native population is actually quite small compared to most countries, really. But I also always knew that there would be more of a pushback in Ireland. And I'm happy to see that. I'm proud to see that, because you really can't, we've talked about this, you can't do to the Irish the gaslighting and the guilt tripping that you can do to other countries. And I wrote about this in a thing that I put on Substack too. The Irish identity isn't so easy to deconstruct either. They know who they are. You can't really just say this random black man is now Irish, although there are a bunch of idiots who will believe that and will go play along with that. But it's really, compared to like the Spaniards or the Italians or other parts of Europe, or even the British, you always get this deconstructionism of the British. Well, what does it mean to be British? Is it the Anglo-Saxons? Is it the Celts? Is it the Vikings? Okay. And therefore, infinity Somalians, because some European tribes fought against each other and invaded each other 1,000 years ago. But with the Irish, you can't really do any of that shit. And so I think that all of those ingredients at play has provided the Irish with a lot more ammunition. And that's why, you get people standing in front of buses. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, the Irish identity, like a lot of it was built on victimhood of being a colony of the British Empire. So it's a bit more difficult to deconstruct that identity, and tell us that we were the scum of the earth and we were racist and all this. Someone asked a question there, just Iberia Solar, does TGP plan on making Spanish content? That's interesting. I did a few years ago, and my Spanish was better a few years ago than it is now, but I made a few videos, and I couldn't believe, like, if you think the censorship in general is bad, but if you make a video in Spanish and you're in Spain, in one case, it was with a girlfriend at the time. She helped me, she edited my translation of a very short essay on mass migration, and she did a very good job on it. And I went to a cafe, kind of a bar actually, and they had Wi-Fi. I didn't have Wi-Fi at the time, and I uploaded the video. I ordered a hamburger and a pint of beer, and I started uploading the video, and it was just an image and the audio, so it didn't take up much memory, whatever. But it uploaded. It took about 5 minutes to upload because the Wi-Fi was weak, but it uploaded, and my hamburger arrived and my beer, and I put my laptop down, and when I was halfway through my hamburger, I looked at the laptop, and the video had been taken down, and I got a strike on my channel. So if you make now, if I do leave Spain, I have thought about this. If I do leave Spain, if I move elsewhere, I would like, just to try and maintain the Spanish I have, I would like to once a week maybe do a 10-minute video or something, just because I think this is something you might look into, Pox. You have a few languages, Italians, Spaniards, French. A lot of them, they have, especially in these circles, they have a decent level of English, but a lot of them, they want to relax. They want to be able to just sit back and understand everything and not have to try and concentrate like crazy. So they would like to hear things that we're saying in their own language. Now, I think there is in the case of Spanish, it's by native speakers, it's number 2 in the world after Mandarin. English is actually 3rd for native speakers. So it's a very useful language, and I think it will be a great way to share your perspectives with other people.
Yeah, I've done some Spanish language commentary now. I did a a lengthy conversation with Iberia Reaccionaria. I think he's actually now changed his name. It might be him because it's the same icon, Iberia Solar. And the same thing happened. We had this conversation. He cut up into smaller, more digestible segments and uploaded it to a brand new YouTube channel. And that video was taken down almost immediately because we talked about the celebration parallax and how it relates to Jewish influence and power. And ironically, because we spoke about it, it was taken down in the very video in which we spoke about how you can't talk about this because they'll take your video down. But we tried to get around it. He appealed, and then the video was back. I don't know exactly how or what happened in that. So sometimes it's worth appealing, guys. If your stuff gets taken down on some platform, it's worth appealing just to see what happens. And again, I know people will complain about it and say, "Oh, it's a total cuckery to be on these platforms. Look what they make you do. Delete your tweets, you can get your account back, or you can't say this, you can't say that. You have to walk on eggshells." I get it. I'm not disagreeing. What I'm saying is, it's the enemy's printing press, and we get to use it. So use it for as much as you can. You get out of it what you can. Don't invest anything into your persona on these platforms. No, use it knowing that you're probably going to get your account taken down at some point, but maximize the use that you can get from it in the time that you're on it, just as if you were breaking into the regime's printing press to make your own pamphlets, your own brochures, your own propaganda posters. That's basically what we're doing. So yeah, I've done some Spanish language stuff. When I started my Pox Populi thing, I think this is actually one of the reasons why it didn't really go anywhere. I was making content in Spanish, Italian, and English. I would make Instagram posts, like one in Spanish, one about something happening in Italy, in Italian. I would be active on Spanish Twitter, Italian Twitter, getting stuck in with people, with the shit libs of these various countries. I'd be posting about stuff in the native language of things that were happening in those places. And I was just like a scattered, shotgun blast, basically. I don't think there was no precision to it. And I think also it's difficult to get a following in one place, let alone trying to do it, in various countries using various languages. And so now that's why I decided, I just mainly do stuff in English, but I keep my eye certainly on these places that I'm familiar with. And occasionally, what I will do now is I will translate stuff happening in Italy into English so that my English-speaking followers can understand what's going on. But I do want to have, I've always said, I am a European nationalist. I grew up in the United States, so I also keep my eye on things going on there. And I do this with Ireland as well, even though Ireland's an English-speaking country. But yeah, I kind of keep my focus on all these various places. I'm a nationalist without a nation, basically. It's kind of unfortunate, but that's how my life has panned out. But yeah, as far as doing other language commentary and stuff, I don't know if I would go back to doing that myself, just because it's difficult to get that following if you're just sort of like a shotgun blast, so it's better to be more precise. But, if people do want to translate my stuff, or maybe I will do that myself when they just translate my Substack articles into Spanish or Italian or things like that. Yeah, that could be interesting. I do have to say, though, it's worth acknowledging that the French, for example, the French dissident right, the French nationalists, they're on our wavelength, or they might even be ahead of us in some things as far as like real world organization. Same could be said in Italy. Nationalist sentiment, it's not so difficult to convince Italians to be, right-wing nationalists. They've got a pretty good tradition for that. Now, that's not to say that global homoism hasn't taken root in Italy. Of course it has. Of course it has. It's not to say there aren't Italian shitlibs. Of course there are. But there is a pretty well-organized and, there's a heritage of nationalism in Italy. In France as well, of course. Of course, it would be in France. France is in many ways the epicenter of this. They're the ones that are suffering through it. You could argue more than anyone else. Arguably, right? It's all relative, I suppose. But I don't think you can deny that France has been an epicenter of demographic degradation, globalism, and they've seen some pretty awful consequences of it. Think of all those terrorist attacks. And so, logically, there is more of a reaction to it going on there. There's more of an organized, real-world activist resistance to it. And that's why, of course, the hammer often falls down very hard on the French nationalists, because the regime knows that if France rises up, the rest of Europe will follow, because it's just always been that way. France is so influential on this continent. Okay, my voice is starting to go out. So German Pointer, I'm going to give you the final word to say, whatever else is on your mind, and leave us with your final thoughts.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation, and if I mirror this next week, you will find links to Pox Populi's YouTube, his Odyssey, and if he's still around on Twitter, his Twitter
we'll
as well.
See.
Yeah. So, but thanks very much for inviting me on, and I'm glad we got to discuss these different topics. And we will
it's always a
chat
pleasure.
again soon.
And you can find German Pointer on Odyssey. His channel is linked in the description on the YouTube. And unfortunately on the Odyssey, which didn't quite work out today. That's very disappointing. Hopefully it won't happen again. But he is on Odyssey, and he does upload quite frequently very interesting videos. He is a great Irish storyteller in the fine tradition of that nation. And so I think you will enjoy the stuff he puts up on his Odyssey channel. So do subscribe. Always a pleasure chatting, my friend. Thanks for coming on. Take care. Thank you, everyone, for being in the chat. Thanks for the comments, the questions, as always. And enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.